What is an etheric sight? How would you see the world around you? According to Leadbeater, we find among sensitive people all degrees of this kind of clairvoyance. But it must be remembered that what I am about to describe is the result of the full and perfectly controlled possession of the faculty only, and that most of the instances met with in real life will be likely to fall far short of it in one direction or another. The most striking change produced in the appearance of inanimate objects is that most of them become almost transparent. A person will be able to see through a brick wall. He therefore sees what is going on in an adjoining room almost as though no intervening wall existed. He can describe with accuracy the contents of a locked box. It is then asked whether under these circumstances a man sees always with this abnormal sight, or only when he wishes to do so. The answer is that if the faculty is perfectly developed, it will be entirely under his control, and he can use that or his more ordinary vision at will. He changes from one to the other as readily and naturally as we now change the focus of our eyes when we look up from our book to follow the motions of some object a mile away. It is, as it were, a focusing of consciousness on the one or other aspect of what is seen, and though the man would have quite clearly in his view the aspect upon which his attention was for the moment fixed, he would always be vaguely conscious of the other aspect too. Just as when we focus our sight upon any object held in our hands, yet we vaguely see the opposite wall of the room as a background. Another curious change which comes from the possession of this sight is that the solid ground upon which the man walks becomes to a certain extent transparent to him, so that he is able to see down into it a considerable depth, much as we can now see into fairly clear water. This enables him to watch a creature burrowing underground, to distinguish a vein of coal or metal if not too far below the surface, and so on. The limit of etheric sight when looking through solid matter appears to be analogous to that imposed upon us when looking through water or mist. We cannot see beyond a certain distance, because the medium through which we are looking is not perfectly transparent. The appearance of inanimate objects is also considerably altered for the man who has increased his visual powers to this extent. The bodies of men and animals are for him in the main transparent, so that he can watch the action of the various internal organs and to some extent diagnose some of their diseases. The etheric sight also enables him to perceive more or less clearly various classes of creatures, elemental and otherwise, whose bodies are not capable of reflecting any of the rays within the limit of the spectrum as ordinarily seen, i.e., we can't normally see it. Among the entities so seen will be some of the lower orders of nature spirits, those whose bodies are composed of the denser etheric matter. To this class belong nearly all the fairies, gnomes, and brownies, about whom there are still so many stories remaining among Scotch and Irish mountains and in remote country places all over the world. Anyone possessing etheric sight would also be able to perceive the etheric double of man. But since this is so nearly identical in size with the physical, it would be hardly likely to attract his attention unless it were partially protected in trance or under the influence of anesthetics. After death, when it withdraws entirely from the dense body, it would be clearly visible to him. Another fact which could hardly fail soon to thrust itself upon his notice would be the extension of his perception of color. He would find himself able to see several entirely new colors, not in the least resembling any of those included in the spectrum as we presently know it, and therefore, of course, quite indescribable in any terms at our command. And not only would he see new objects that were wholly of these new colors, but he would also discover that modifications had been introduced into the color of many objects with which he was quite familiar, according to whether they had or had not some tinge of these new hues intermingled with the old, so that two surfaces of color, which to ordinary eyes appeared to match perfectly, would often present distinctly different shades to his keener sight. We have now touched upon some of the principal changes which would be introduced into a man's world when he gained etheric sight, and it must always be remembered that in most cases a corresponding change would at the same time be brought about in his other senses also, so that he would be capable of hearing, and perhaps even of feeling, more than most of those around him. Now, supposing that in addition to this he obtained the sight of the astral plane, what further changes would be observable? We will describe this in a later episode.